In 1918, the federal government told Americans to stop harvesting wild birds. It said the species needed protection. It said even one egg from one nest was poaching. It said the songbirds and the duck eggs and the pheasant clutches that had fed your great-grandfather's family for generations belonged to a federal agency now. Your great-grandfather kept doing it anyway, snaring rabbits behind the woodshed and lifting morning eggs from the cottonwood by the creek, just like his father did before him. And here is the part nobody talks about. The Migratory Bird Treaty Act was negotiated with the British Crown. It bound American families to a foreign treaty before they ever voted on it. Songbirds, ducks, and geese became property of a federal agency that would not even exist in its modern form for another 22 years. Number 7 on this list became a federal felony in 1933, the same year Prohibition supposedly ended. The penalty today is up to 5 years in federal prison and a $10,000 fine. It was always about excise tax revenue. It was never about safety. Number 18 on this list received Food and Drug Administration clearance on January 12, 2004. It is the most ancient form of medicine on this list. It is also the only one that requires a doctor's prescription, which means doing it yourself is practicing medicine without a license. These 25 tricks were not abandoned because they stopped working. They were abandoned because somebody got rich when you forgot them. Your frontier ancestors built lives, raised children, and survived disasters using knowledge that took thousands of years to develop. Then a single century of federal regulation, lobbyist money, and zoning law wiped most of it out in 3 generations. Before we start, hit subscribe. What you are about to learn is not survival fantasy. It is American history. Let us count down. Number 25. Wild bird egg harvesting. Every spring before the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, your great-grandmother walked the hedgerows in May with a small basket. She knew which nests belonged to which species. She knew never to take more than half. She knew never to take from a rare or endangered bird. She came home with quail eggs, pheasant eggs, mourning dove eggs, and the occasional turkey clutch from a wild hen. They were small, rich, and cost nothing. The Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918 made the harvesting of any protected wild bird egg a federal crime. The maximum penalty for taking eggs of a protected species is 6 months in federal prison and a $15,000 fine. For endangered species, it climbs to a year in prison and $100,000 in fines. The act covers more than 1,000 species. The unprotected list is short game birds in season, invasive starlings and house sparrows, and a few state-specific exceptions. Your great-grandmother's knowledge of nest identification, egg recognition, and ethical harvest is now a skill that almost no one carries. In a survival scenario, an experienced egg finder can supply a family with eggs from March through July without hunting a single bird. Number 24. The illegal 1,000-gallon rainwater cistern. A standard farmhouse roof, 1,500 square feet in area, sheds approximately 900 gallons for every inch of rain. A midsummer thunderstorm can fill a household cistern in a single afternoon. Your great-grandfather built a stone-lined cistern under the kitchen, fed by gutters from the roof, with a hand pump in the kitchen sink. He never paid a water bill. He never had to. By the late 1900s, several western states had explicitly restricted or banned residential rainwater collection. Colorado was the most aggressive, banning all collection on the legal theory that rainwater belonged to downstream water rights holders the moment it fell from the sky. Colorado legalized residential collection of up to 110 gallons in 2016. Utah and Oregon followed. A cistern over 1,000 gallons in capacity remains restricted in most western states without a water rights permit and an engineering review. The legal logic is unchanged. The water belongs to the state. Your great-grandfather laughed at that idea. The water fell on his roof. He caught it. He used it. He owed nothing to anyone for it. That is the frontier ethic in 3 sentences. Number 23. Salt licks for deer. A natural mineral salt block, weathered into a depression in the woods, will draw every deer within a 2-mile radius to drink the salt-laden runoff. Your great-grandfather placed a single block at the edge of the back 40 in August. By rifle season in November, Every deer he wanted to take was visiting that block on a predictable schedule. This was not poaching to him. This was farming. State Department of Natural Resources regulations have made salt licks for hunting illegal in many western and northern states. Montana, Minnesota, New York, and Colorado prohibit the use of mineral attractants during hunting season. Texas, Arkansas, and Connecticut still permit them. The penalty is typically a license revocation. Repeat or commercial violations can climb to a felony charge with thousands of dollars in fines. The reasoning is fair chase ethics. A baited deer is not a hunted deer. But the same regulation now criminalizes a homesteader who feeds his cattle salt, licks at the edge of the woods, and steps outside with a rifle in November. Your great-grandfather did not separate the activities. The frontier ethic was efficient harvest from a stewarded landscape. Number 22. The sod or dugout house. The settlers who pushed west across the Great Plains in the 1860s and 70s arrived at land with no trees. They had no lumber. They had no money for shipped materials. They built shelter from the ground itself. A sod house was constructed from blocks of prairie turf, cut with a special breaking plow into bricks, roughly 2 feet long, 12 inches wide, and 4 inches thick. Stacked grass side down, with a wooden frame for the door and one window, the sod walls stood 3 feet thick and held a stable interior temperature year-round. A dugout was simpler. A hillside, an excavated cavity, a roof of poles and sod, and the family was housed for winter in a single weekend of work. Modern building codes prohibit both structures in nearly every American county that has codes at all. The reasons are minimum square footage requirements, structural engineering certification, septic and sanitary requirements, and minimum window count. A sod house meets none of these. Your great-grandparents on the Nebraska frontier raised 6 children in a sod house with a packed dirt floor. They were not poor. They owned their land outright. The walls cost them nothing but labor. The frontier model of shelter was sovereignty by way of sweat. The modern model is debt by way of mortgage. Number 21. Wire snares. First pattern break. The American fur trapper of the 1800s made his living with a wire loop. A simple twitch-up snare, anchored to a sapling pulled down under tension, would catch a rabbit by the neck and hoist it 3 feet off the ground in a single motion. The rabbit died fast. The pelt stayed clean. The trapper checked his line at dawn and resold meat and fur in the village by noon. Then came the bans. 20 United States states have made the wire snare flat out illegal for fur trapping. Arizona, California, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, New York, Oklahoma, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Washington lead the list, with restrictions in Maryland, Tennessee, New Jersey, Massachusetts, and Florida. Roughly 30 more states require a trapping license to use them at all. Here is the technique: a length of stranded wire, a slipknot loop, an anchor point, and a trigger that releases when the animal pushes through. It can be built from picture-hanging wire and a hardware store eye bolt for under $2. In a survival scenario where ammunition is scarce, the snare line keeps a family in protein indefinitely. Set 6 snares before dark. Check them at first light. Your great-grandfather did this every winter of his working life. Number 20. Brain tanning. Here is one of the strangest and most beautiful coincidences in nature. Every mammal carries in its skull approximately the right volume of emulsified fats and lecithins to tan its own hide. Your great-grandfather knew this. After the November butchering, he split open the deer skull, removed the brain, and worked it into a paste with warm water. He scraped the hide clean of flesh and hair, soaked it in the brain solution, and then pulled and stretched and worked the leather over a smoothed log for 2 full days. The result was buckskin, soft, breathable, washable, and tough enough to last a lifetime. He cut it into moccasins, gloves, hunting shirts, and pouches. Nothing was wasted. This practice is entirely legal in all 50 states. There is no permit, no inspection, no licensed tanner requirement. The only thing standing between you and brain-tanned leather is the same thing standing in the way of every item on this list. The knowledge has gone quiet. Hide scraped within hours. Brain solution at body temperature, smoked over low fire to lock in the tannins. Your great-grandfather kept everything that came off the animal. The brain that tanned the leather, the bones that became tools, the sinew that became thread. Sovereignty starts with not throwing things away. Number 19. The hidden smokehouse. Every farm before 1940 had one, a small wooden or stone structure, 10 feet square at most, with a low smouldering fire of hickory or apple wood at one end, and meat hanging from iron hooks at the other. Your great-grandfather hung whole hams, sides of bacon, sausage links, and cuts of venison in the smokehouse for weeks at a time. Cold smoking at temperatures below 90 degrees Fahrenheit deposited antimicrobial compounds directly into the meat. A properly smoked ham kept edible at room temperature for a year. Personal use smoking on private property is legal in nearly every American jurisdiction. The moment you sell a single pound, the United States Department of Agriculture inspection requirement triggers. Commercial smokehouses must meet hazard analysis and critical control point standards that effectively price out small producers. The technique requires precision, a separate firebox connected by a pipe so the smoke cools before reaching the meat, hardwood only, never softwood, which produces toxic resins, a reliable thermometer. Your great-grandfather built his smokehouse from rough lumber and roofing tin. He could preserve a whole hog for the family in a long November weekend. It belongs in your hands. Number 18. Maggot therapy. Second pattern break. The story of medical maggots is the cleanest example of a frontier remedy that the modern Food and Drug Administration was forced to admit actually works. In the American Civil War, surgeons noticed that wounded soldiers whose injuries became infested with greenbottle fly larvae somehow recovered better than soldiers whose wounds were kept artificially clean. The reason was specific. Greenbottle larvae, scientific name Lucilia sericata, eat only necrotic tissue. They will not touch healthy living flesh. They also secrete antimicrobial enzymes that kill bacteria the larvae crawl through. Your great-grandmother on the homestead knew this. So did Civil War battlefield surgeons. Antibiotics arrived in the 1940s and buried the technique. Then antibiotic resistance brought it back. On January 12, 2004, the Food and Drug Administration cleared a product called medical maggots, developed by Ronald Sherman under 510K clearance number K033391. They are now classified as a prescription medical device. Doing it yourself is illegal, practicing medicine without a license. The maggots themselves are not banned to possess. The frontier knowledge is. The frontier knowledge is also exactly what saved soldiers from gangrene before antibiotics existed. In a long-term grid-down scenario, with no functioning hospital and no antibiotic supply, this technique is the difference between losing a limb and saving it. Your great-grandfather understood it. The pharmaceutical industry would prefer that you did not. Number 17. Pine resin salve. Long before pharmaceutical companies sold antibiotic ointment in plastic tubes, your great-grandmother walked the woods with a small tin and harvested the amber sap that wept from wounded pines. She brought it home and rendered it in a heavy pot with animal fat and beeswax in roughly equal parts. The result was a thick golden salve that sealed cuts, drew out splinters, and kept a wound dry through a week of farm work. Pine resin contains antimicrobial compounds that are naturally antibacterial and antifungal. The fat carries the resin into the skin. The beeswax forms a waterproof seal. There is no regulation against making it. There is no permit, no license, no inspection. This is the most legal entry on this list. Learn this one first. It is yours. Number 16. Baiting waterfowl. Before the federal duck stamp existed, your great-grandfather scattered shelled corn at the edge of the pond at sunset. By dawn, the surface was thick with mallards, pintails, and Canada geese. He took what his family needed in a single morning shoot. The Migratory Bird Hunting Stamp Act of 1934 required hunters to purchase a federal duck stamp. By 1935, federal regulations prohibited the use of bait to draw migratory waterfowl. The United States Fish and Wildlife Service enforces this rule, and a field is considered baited for 10 days after the last grain is removed. The penalty is up to $1,000 and 6 months in jail for a first offense. Repeat violations climb fast. The biological reasoning is sound. Baited waterfowl concentrate in unsustainable numbers. But the same regulation now criminalizes a private landowner who feeds ducks at his own pond and then steps outside with a shotgun. The line between baiting and feeding is thinner than the public realizes. Your great-grandfather did not separate the activities. He maintained the pond, fed the birds, and harvested what the property could sustain. The frontier ethic was abundance through stewardship. The regulation replaces that with abstinence through enforcement. Number 15. Punji sticks. Third pattern break. The American frontier farmer who lived alone in Indian territory or in cattle-rustling country built his perimeter defense from sharpened stakes. A line of fire-hardened wooden spikes set at chest height in tall grass, or a pit lined with downward-angled bamboo points, would stop a midnight raider better than any wall. Your great-grandfather, on a homestead in 1870s Wyoming, used it because he had no other option. There is no single federal statute against punji sticks. The legal exposure comes from state-level booby trap laws, which exist in nearly every state and which carry felony assault charges if anyone is injured. Even on private property, even with no trespassing posted, a sharpened stake that wounds a fleeing burglar will land the property owner in front of a grand jury. The technique itself is simple. Hardwood stakes, fire-hardened to drive moisture from the tip, set at a 45-degree angle. The principle is mechanical. A falling body cannot easily disengage from a downward-pointing spike. This is a last resort technique. It is a tool of pure desperation, deployed when firearms are unavailable, the perimeter is large, and the threat is constant. Your great-grandfather hoped never to use it. He kept the option ready anyway. The frontier did not have 911. It had self-reliance and the consequences thereof. Number 14. Spearfishing freshwater game fish. Your great-grandfather waded into the shallow rapids in late spring, a hand-carved gig in his right hand, and pinned spawning bass and walleye against the gravel bed. The technique is older than fishing rods. It predates fishing nets. It is the most direct possible interaction between a hungry man and a meal. Modern State Department of Natural Resources regulations have made spearing game fish illegal in nearly every state. Bass, trout, walleye, pike, and muskellunge are off-limits. The reasoning is conservation. A spear is too efficient against spawning fish, but the same states often permit spearing of so-called rough fish. Common carp, gar, suckers, bowfin, and bullhead are routinely speared in some states without restriction. The technique requires more skill than a rod. Light refracts at the waterline. The shooter must aim below where the fish appears. The strike must be straight down to drive the point home before the fish can react. In a survival scenario, this is the most ammunition-free method of taking large fish from a river or pond. Your great-grandfather caught dinner with a sharpened pole and an afternoon of patience. You can too. Number 13. Acorn leaching. Every oak tree in North America produces acorns. Some years, a single mature white oak drops over 500 pounds of them. Your great-grandfather walked under those trees in October and gathered them by the bushel. Raw acorns contain tannins that make them bitter and digestively harmful. Your great-grandmother knew the trick. She cracked the shells, ground the meat into coarse flour, and ran cold water through it for 2 days. The tannins washed away. What remained was a high-calorie nut flour that tasted faintly of chestnut and could be baked into bread, mush, or cakes. Acorn flour delivers more calories per pound than cornmeal. It stores at room temperature for years. It costs nothing. Foraging acorns is illegal in every national park in the United States. It is restricted on most public land managed by the Bureau of Land Management or the United States Forest Service. On private property, acorn harvesting is unregulated. Your great-grandmother knew exactly how to use it. Number 12. The yarrow poultice. Common yarrow grows in every state of the Union. Your great-grandmother knew it on sight. She crushed the leaves between her palms, pressed them directly onto a bleeding cut, and bound it with a strip of clean cotton. Within minutes, the bleeding slowed. Within hours, it stopped. This is not folklore. Yarrow contains acylane and a class of alkaloids that accelerate the body's natural clotting cascade. 2 regulations stand in the way of using yarrow today. The Food and Drug Administration prohibits anyone but a licensed practitioner from making medical claims about plant products. Foraging on public land is restricted in many states. Both rules collapse the moment you grow yarrow in your own garden and use it on your own family. Number 11. The trot line. Fourth pattern break. A trot line is a single long line, weighted at both ends, that lies along the bottom of a river or pond, with multiple baited drop hooks attached at intervals. Your great-grandfather set a 100-hook trot line in the river at sunset, baited each hook with chunks of liver or live minnows, and pulled it at dawn. He fed his family on the catch. He sold the surplus by the pound at the country store. State regulations on trot lines vary more than any other technique on this list. South Carolina permits up to 50 hooks per line with mandatory tagging. Tennessee permits up to 100 hooks. Florida caps non-commercial trot lines at 25. The rationale, as with gill nets, is efficiency. A long trot line is a non-discriminating tool. It catches whatever swims by. The technique requires knowledge. Where to anchor, what depth to set the line, what bait the species in this stretch of river will take. Your great-grandfather knew his river the way you know your morning commute. He could read the surface and tell you where every catfish hole was. In a survival scenario, a trot line is the highest yield passive fishing method available to a single person. 100 hooks set overnight will produce more protein than a day of rod fishing. The frontier knowledge belongs in your hands. The legal calculation is yours. Number 10. Friction fire by bow drill. Before lighters, before strike-anywhere matches, before flint and steel was widely available, your frontier ancestors made fire with 4 pieces of wood: a spindle, a fireboard, a bow, and a bearing block. Spin the spindle fast enough against the fireboard, and the friction generates an ember in roughly 2 minutes with practice. The technique is older than civilization. It is also entirely legal. There is no federal statute against making fire from sticks. The skill is real. Correct wood selection, both pieces dry, the angle of the bow, the downward pressure, the speed, and in more than 30 states, an open burn ban during fire season turns a bow drill ember into a misdemeanor. Your great-grandfather could start a fire in a rainstorm with a piece of cedar he split that morning. You can learn this skill in a weekend. It is the most fundamental survival capability a human being can carry. Number 9. Bird liming. A sticky resin, traditionally made from boiled holly bark, mistletoe berries, or pine sap mixed with linseed oil, is spread on tree branches in known bird habitat. Songbirds, doves, and small game birds land, stick, and cannot escape. Your great-grandfather collected them at dusk, and your great-grandmother had them in the pot by morning. The technique is ancient. Roman bird catchers used it. In the United States, bird liming for any migratory bird species is a federal violation under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. The penalty is up to 6 months in federal prison and a $15,000 fine for protected species. For endangered species, it climbs much higher. The technique is undeniably effective. A single small fig tree, properly limed, can yield a dozen songbirds in a single evening. Each bird is roughly 2 ounces of meat and almost no fat. This is not a calorie-rich method. It is a desperation method. Your great-grandfather used it in the lean spring months when the winter stores ran low and the gardens were not yet producing. The frontier did not turn up its nose at small birds. 2 ounces of meat cooked over a fire fed a child. Number 8. The stone fish weir. A fish weir is a low stone or wooden funnel built across a stream that channels swimming fish into a holding pen at the apex. The technique predates agriculture. Indigenous people built them for thousands of years. Your great-grandfather often repaired the same ones. The structure is permanent. A V-shaped wall of stones, 3 feet high, narrowing to a basket trap at the downstream end. Migrating fish swim into the funnel and cannot escape. State regulations now prohibit fish weirs in nearly every American jurisdiction. The reasons are over-efficiency, dam permit requirements, and Endangered Species Act enforcement. A weir on a salmon-bearing stream in the Pacific Northwest is a federal violation. The few legal exceptions are tribal fisheries and traditional native subsistence sites, where treaty rights override state regulation. The technique itself is genius. No bait, no hook, no line. Once built, the weir works on every tide and every fish run for as long as the stones stay in place. Your great-grandfather inherited his from his father, repaired it after every spring flood, and harvested fish from it twice a week for 50 years. The frontier built infrastructure for permanence. The modern regulatory state requires removal. Number 7. Moonshining for fuel and antiseptic. Fifth pattern break. Prohibition supposedly ended in 1933. What most Americans do not know is that home distillation of distilled spirits remains illegal, a federal felony to this day. There is no personal use exemption. The popular myth of 1 gallon per year for household consumption is exactly that, a myth. Title 26 of the United States Code, Section 5601. Subsection A. Paragraph 8 makes any unlicensed distillation a federal felony, with a penalty of up to 5 years in federal prison and a $10,000 fine. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives enforces this. The agency was originally a unit of the Treasury Department because distillation regulation has always been about excise tax revenue. It has never been about safety. Your great-grandfather distilled corn whiskey in the back hollow because he had no other source of cash income. The same still produced 180 proof alcohol that sterilized wounds, fueled lanterns, ran small engines, and traded for everything else his family needed. In a long-term grid-down scenario, distilled alcohol is the single most useful chemical on a farm. It cleans, fuels, preserves, and barters. The frontier knowledge of mash, fermentation, and the cut between heads and tails is the most regulated and prosecuted skill on this entire list. It is also the most strategically valuable. Make of that what you will. Number 6. Black powder making. 3 ingredients: sulfur, charcoal, and saltpeter. Mixed in a precise ratio of 75% saltpeter, 15% charcoal, and 10% sulfur, ground together with a mortar and pestle, slightly moistened, pressed, and dried. The result is the propellant that powered every firearm on the American continent for 300 years. Your great-grandfather made his own. Saltpeter was scraped from old barn floors and outhouses where it crystallized naturally from animal waste. Charcoal came from the wood stove. Sulfur was bought at the general store for 10 cents a pound. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives requires a federal explosives license for the manufacture of more than 50 pounds of black powder for personal use. Possession of the 3 component chemicals is legal. So is small-batch personal manufacture, with strict limits on storage volume. In a long-term grid-down scenario, the man who can make his own propellant from animal waste, charcoal, and a bag of yellow powder controls the weapon system. Your great-grandfather understood this. The federal government understands it now. Number 5. Handmade gill nets. A gill net is a flat curtain of mesh set vertically across a fish's path that catches the fish by the gill plates as it tries to swim through. It is the most efficient passive fishing method ever developed. A 200-foot net set across a narrow channel will fill in a single tide. Your great-grandfather knotted his own gill nets from cotton twine in the off-season, sitting by the wood stove with a wooden mesh gauge. A working net took him a winter. It would last him 10 years. Recreational gill netting is now illegal in nearly every American state. The few exceptions, mostly in rural Alaska and certain native subsistence fisheries, require commercial licenses or tribal rights documentation. The reason for the ban is real. A gill net does not select. It catches everything: endangered species, juveniles, turtles. The technique still has emergency value. In a true food crisis, a hand-knotted gill net set across a creek mouth at dusk is the difference between hungry and fed. Your great-grandfather understood that the law and the necessity could diverge. The frontier ethic was clear. Take what you need. Take no more. Move on. Number 4. Hand fishing, also called noodling. The catfisher wades into shoulder-deep water along a muddy riverbank, locates a known catfish den, reaches his arm into the underwater hole, allows the catfish to bite his hand, and then hauls the fish out by the gill plate. Adult flathead catfish can exceed 70 pounds. This is exactly as dangerous as it sounds. Snapping turtles share the same dens. So do beavers. So, occasionally, do water moccasins. Hand fishing is currently legal in only 8 United States states: Mississippi, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Louisiana, Kentucky, Alabama, Georgia, and Texas permit the practice with seasonal limits. 42 states ban it outright. The legal reasoning is conservation. Spawning catfish in their dens are easy targets. Hand fishing, without limits, could devastate breeding populations. Your great-grandfather, if he was raised in the Tennessee River Valley or the Mississippi Delta, considered noodling a normal Saturday afternoon activity. A single 70-pound flathead feeds a family for weeks, once smoked or canned. The technique requires nerve and a working knowledge of riverbank geology. It is the most physically intimate method of taking food from the wild that exists in North America. Number 3. Night lighting, also called pit lamping. A bright handheld light shone into a deer's eyes after dark will freeze the animal in place for 10 to 30 seconds. The eyes reflect the light back as twin amber moons. The shooter has all the time he needs. Your great-grandfather did this on the back 40 in November, when the family meat supply ran low. The deer froze, the rifle cracked, the family ate. This is felony poaching in nearly all 50 states. Most states classify it as a Category A wildlife violation. The penalties include thousands of dollars in fines, automatic license revocation for life, confiscation of the firearm and the vehicle, and in some states, mandatory jail time. The reasoning is unambiguous. Night lighting is too efficient to be ethical hunting. A spotlight reduces a fair chase pursuit to an execution. State wildlife agencies treat it as the most serious form of poaching, short of commercial market hunting. The technique was banned because it works. A skilled spotlighter can take a deer in 30 seconds with no tracking, no stalking, no skill, and no waiting. The ethical calculation assumes an industrial food system that backs up your hunt. Without that backup, your great-grandfather's calculation reverses. Number 2. Pemmican. The single most concentrated, longest-storing, most calorically dense preserved food ever developed by human beings on this continent. The recipe is 3 ingredients: lean dried meat, ground to powder, rendered animal fat, dried wild berries, optional. Mixed in roughly equal weight ratios, packed into rawhide bags or natural casings, sealed with melted fat, the result lasts 20 years at room temperature. Native peoples invented it. The Métis fur traders of the Hudson's Bay Company built an entire continental supply chain around it. The French and English voyageurs who paddled the fur trade routes from Lake Superior to the Yukon ran their entire calorie budget on pemmican. Lewis and Clark survived on it from 1804 to 1806. A single pound of properly made pemmican delivers approximately 3,000 calories. A working man requires roughly 2 pounds per day. 20 pounds, packed correctly, will keep him alive for 10 days of heavy labor in the cold. There is no regulation against making pemmican on private property. There is no license, no inspection, no permit. The technique is exact. Meat dried until it shatters. Fat rendered with no water. Ratios precise. Too much fat, and it goes rancid. Too little, and it crumbles. Your great-great-grandfather carried pemmican across this continent. The fur trade ran on it. The Plains tribes survived winters on it. 20 pounds in a sealed bag, stored cool and dry, is the single most secure food storage system ever developed by human hands. Industrial preserved food has nothing on it. 20 years of room temperature shelf life with 3 ingredients and no plastic packaging. The frontier solved food security 1,000 years before refrigeration. We forgot the answer in 70 years. Number 1. The Rule of 3. This is not a single trick. It is a philosophy, and it is the one that connects everything else on this list. Your frontier ancestors taught their children, before they could read, 4 numbers in a specific order. 3 minutes without air. 3 hours without shelter in extreme conditions. 3 days without water. 3 weeks without food. Memorize those 4 numbers. They are the only survival hierarchy that matters. They are also a fact of human biology, not a regulation, which makes the rule of 3 the most legal item on this entire list. Your body does not need a $500 tactical knife. Your body needs to breathe. Your body does not need a freeze-dried bucket of food rated for 25 years. Your body needs shelter from cold and wet for the next 4 hours. Your body does not need a $4,000 generator. Your body needs 3 days of clean water. The entire preparedness industry is sized to your fears, not your biology. Your great-grandfather inverted that priority every day of his life. Every item on this list maps to one of those 4 prongs: air, pine resin salve and yarrow poultice, when breath is the failing prong; shelter, the sod house, the smoke house, brain-tanned leather, friction fire; water, the illegal 1,000-gallon cistern; the fish weir at the spring outlet; food, pemmican, acorn flour, wild eggs, smoked meat, weirs, hand fishing, trot lines, snares, spears, gill nets, salt licks, night lighting, bird liming, baited waterfowl. Defense protects all 4: punji sticks, black powder, moonshine that sterilizes wounds and trades for everything else. Medicine restores the body when a prong fails. Maggot therapy, yarrow, pine resin. 24 techniques, 4 prongs of survival. 1 philosophy. Your great-great-grandfather ran his life on sunlight, wood, water, and his own labor. He owed nothing to a utility company because utility companies did not exist yet. He owed nothing to a seed company because patent seed law did not exist yet. He owed nothing to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives because the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives did not exist yet. He owed nothing to a grocery chain because there was no grocery chain within 100 miles of his door. The entire infrastructure of modern American dependency, the grid, the municipal water system, the commercial food chain, the pharmaceutical supply line, the licensed contractor industry, the regulatory state itself, was built within living memory and sold to us as progress. A man who produces nothing is dependent on whoever produces everything. None of this is fantasy. None of this is prepper paranoia. It is how human beings lived on this land for the entire length of American history before the last 70 years. Your great-grandparents knew all of it. We forgot it in a single generation because forgetting was profitable for someone else. That knowledge did not die. It just went quiet. Here is your challenge. Pick 1. Just 1. Make pine resin salve this weekend. Pine sap is everywhere. Animal fat is at the butcher counter. Beeswax is at any hardware store. Build a bow drill kit from sticks in your yard and learn to make fire from friction in one afternoon. Find a state where rainwater cisterns are legal in larger volumes and sketch what a 1,000-gallon system would look like on your roof. Identify 1 wild plant in your neighborhood. Yarrow grows in nearly every yard in North America. Learn it on site. Tell me in the comments which one you are trying first. Tell me if your grandparents did any of these, because I promise you, somebody in your family tree knew every last trick on this list. That knowledge did not die. It just went quiet. It is time to start listening again.